Hello, everyone. This is Margaret Manning with 60 and Me. This is the place where women over 60 come to be inspired. You know, in this community, we've lived 6 really intense decades of looking for meaning in our lives and searching for that elusive happiness. And my guest tonight, Gretchen Rubin, is going to help us unravel this mystery. Gretchen started her career as an attorney and then changed to being a writer and has published several books, including a best-selling international bestseller called The Happiness Project. So now her blog, where she daily kind of reports back on this pursuit of happiness. So Gretchen, welcome to the show.
Oh, I'm so happy to be talking to you.
Thank you so much. It's really great to meet you. I'm happy that you're here already. I'm feeling the emotion because we've got a lot of questions, and I'm so curious as to why, of all the things you could have written about, you just one day decided, why not write about happiness? Were you unhappy? Were you struggling? What was your motivation?
You know, it was funny. I got the idea to write the Happiness Project in a very ordinary moment of my life. I was stuck on a city bus in the pouring rain, and I had one of those rare opportunities for reflection. And I thought, what do I want from life anyway?
Yes.
And I thought, I want to be happy. But I didn't spend any time thinking about whether I was happy or how I could be happier. So I decided to do a happiness project. I went out to the library the next morning, got a giant stack of books, and I wanted to figure out ancient philosophers, contemporary scientists, popular culture, what should I do if I wanted to be happier? Could I even make myself happier? And at first it was just going to be for me, but then I decided that I was going to write a book about it because I realized that the subject matter was so rich and so fascinating. I wanted to it just seemed inexhaustible. So what I tried to do was figure out, well, if you really wanted to make yourself happier, how would you go about it? And could you make a difference in your happiness level?
You know, what I love about the book is that you actually do go out to ancient wisdom and, contemporary science, and you really try to understand it from all those different angles. So you read all this information, you distilled all the wisdom, and how could you net it out? What did you discover? I mean, what are the key elements? I mean, what is happiness to start with? How did you define it? How did you start?
Well, I started out as a lawyer, so, I spent a semester defining contract. So I decided with happiness, I really wasn't going to worry about finding a perfect definition, because something like 15 academic definitions of happiness. Right. And I think they almost make things muddier instead of clearer, because people can just start arguing about, is it peace? Is it satisfaction? Is it hedonic well-being? Is it, and I think that really for the lay person, the looseness of the term happiness is actually beneficial, because you can think that it's peace and I can think that it's bliss, and we can sort of be aiming in our own direction. I also think it's more helpful to think about being happier rather than achieving happiness, because right. What is happiness? How would you get there? How would you stay there? What would that look like? It's very confusing. But happier, no matter what people think, it's a direction. It's becoming happier. I mean, even at a time in your life where it's not possible to be happy, you could be happier, or as happy as you can be under the circumstances. So I think it's easier to think about that. Yeah. So that's how I framed it for myself.
So what would you say are the qualities of a happy person? How would you define, a resilient person would have certain characteristics? How would you define the characteristics of a happy individual?
Well, that's just getting at the same thing. I think, they have tests that they, objective measurements that they use when they're sort of trying to see, if you say you're happy, do I say I think you're happy? So, like smiling and engagement and stuff like that. That's not something that I worry about so much, because I'm really interested in the subjective experience of a person. If a person thinks they're happy, then they are happy. If they don't think they're happy, then they're not happy. So
and
I focus on is the internal experience of happiness.
It's kind of a mindset. And probably if you are actually able to examine the brain, and maybe you did actually study this, you could probably see that a person who says they were happy would actually be showing in their brain all the indications that they are happy, whether they've got circumstances that would say they're not. They are. They feel that they are. They look like they are.
When you're thinking about how to be happier, how to live a happy life, I think that you need to think about 4 different ways of thinking about your experience. First, you want to think about feeling good. That's the feeling of feeling happy. You're enthusiastic, you're feeling joyful, you're feeling engaged, you're feeling interested, you're feeling
Mm-hmm.
loving, you're having that feeling good, that's
Right.
lifting you up. Then you have to think about feeling bad because things lift us up and things drag us down. Sometimes both at the same time. Being happy doesn't mean that you don't feel unhappy, weirdly. They kind of together. So how do you get rid of things that make you feel guilty or remorseful or angry or resentful? Like, what are the things that you could eliminate? And I found with my happiness project, I really focused more on eliminating things that were making me feel bad, even adding things that were making me feel good. That's how I got more lift. So there's feeling good and feeling bad. Those are pretty easy to understand. More complex, and I think this is one of the things he's trying to wrap up in his idea, is feeling right. Now, feeling right is the feeling that we are living a life that reflects our values. Now, sometimes to live a life that reflects your values can actually make you feel bad. It can bring you bad feeling. But you choose to do this because it's the life that you choose to lead because of your values. So, for instance, one of the things the happiness experts always talk about is a bad commute. It turns out that people don't adjust to a bad commute, and it makes them feel bad every single day.
All the time.
So a very common happiness recommendation is live closer to your job. So, which makes perfect sense, right? Have less of that feeling bad every day. But the reason a lot of people live far from their jobs is because of some other value in their life. Like they really want a good school for their children, or they really want to be closer to nature. And so they choose to have this thing that makes them feel bad every day because there's some way in which it makes them feel right. And there was this very poignant example of this when somebody told me, oh, I had this terrible relationship with my father. He was a terrible father to me and my brothers. He's dying in the hospital. My brothers refused to visit him. He was such a jerk. But I feel like I need to go. And so I go once a week and I sit there and he's just as big a jerk as ever. And I hate it. I dread it. I don't enjoy being there. But why am I doing this? It makes me so unhappy. And I said, well, it makes you feel right because you feel like this is what you need to do. You had a bad relationship, but he's your father. You feel like this is what you need to do to feel right. And then the final aspect, which is also a little bit hard to understand, is what I would call the atmosphere of growth. People are happier when they feel like they're growing, when they're making progress, when they're making something better, when they're fixing something, when they're helping someone, when they're learning something or teaching something. And if you can have that element of growth in your life, that's an engine of happiness. And I think this is one of the reasons, like having a pet, like you're helping the pet and you're training the pet. And, it's just this, you see the pet grow, or you see your children grow, or you learn how to speak a new language, or you learn how to, you fixed up your garden for the first time. Like anything where you're seeing that growth brings you happiness too. It also often brings feelings of frustration, feeling stupid. Like when you're trying to learn how to do something, you think of like learning to ride a bike for the first time. It's super frustrating. But then you have this feeling of growth. So a lot of times a happy life is not one that is free from negative emotions.
Yes.
At all.
Talking about negative emotions, I'm glad you raised that though, because a lot of women in our community they're 60 years old and a lot of them have retired or have been forced to retire. And they're living pretty hard lives. They're working part-time jobs or living on a pension. And so sometimes there's a lot of cynicism and a little negativity about it. I mean, are there times in your life where it's healthy to feel negative thoughts and to be unhappy? Is that a place where you can grow out of?
Absolutely. I mean, some people I think like a happiness project would mean that you were completely happy every moment of every day. And like, that's not realistic. And I don't even think it would be a good life. Negative emotions are very important to a happy life because they are big flashing warning signs that something is not working. And so if you're feeling angry or resentful or guilty or bored, that's telling you that something could change and might change and be better. And so that is a really useful signal. Now, we all have things in our life that we cannot change. And so sometimes what that needs to tell you is like, well, what can you do to make it as good as it can be under the circumstances? So you have to realistically think about what the circumstances are and what you can do. But often we have more control than we think. Even in our own, I mean, you mentioned earlier the idea of the perspective that you bring to it. Even your own perspective can be a change. So even if external circumstances can't change, if your perception of your external circumstances changes, that is a true change. And so I think to think that you should feel no negative emotion is not realistic and not even very helpful. But then you have to say, okay, well, I feel this negative emotion, so therefore, what will I do? And one thing I think a trap that a lot of people fall into, and I've certainly fallen into this myself, is sort of like, I'm so stressed out. I'm so stressed out. And then the problem with saying that is like, it doesn't suggest any solutions because say, I'm exhausted because I stay up too late, or I hate going to work because I have a really jerky boss, or I hate my commute, so it's no fun to go to work in the morning, or I have no time to see my friends, or whatever. That suggests a solution. If you're unhappy because you have no time to see your friends, what's the solution? Just saying that you're stressed, it's very passive too. It's like, I'm so stressed, but unclear what is stressing me. Make the active verb,
Yeah.
what is happening. And then a lot of times, weirdly, I found by identifying a problem, you somehow can see, oh, well, maybe there's a solution here. Sometimes quite obvious. It's hard just to sort of put your finger on what's actually bothering.
Well, one thing that you said a couple of times, which has really reinforced for me this concept of happiness, is that it's a dynamic thing. That it's not a passive thing, that even when you are in the middle of a tough time, as long as you do something and move forward, and don't dwell on the past and, take the energy of the present to actually solve, or like you said, to do something, positive, that it works. But, on a practical note, I mean, if women in the community are listening to this and thinking, okay, so I'm not that happy in my life and I can't see what I can change. What can they change? I mean, what choices can people make in their lives so that they can move towards a happier state?
Okay, well, I'm going to start at the very, very most basic level. Okay. We don't have much time, so I'm going to talk about the lowest hanging fruit here. Weirdly, a lot of people just don't get enough sleep. Just getting enough sleep, if you are chronically sleep deprived, is going to do amazing things for your mood, your memory, your energy, because the sense of energy is very important to happiness. Your focus, they think it contributes to weight gain, immune function, there's all these things. So if you find yourself, but also often when people are unhappy, it's like they kind of get into this state where they're just lying on the couch, staying up late, watching reruns, changing the channel. It's like the first thing you should do is really try to make sure that you get those 7 hours, unless you're one of the extremely rare people that doesn't need it. Now, a lot of people, if you say to them, how do you feel? Like, you only get 6 hours of sleep a night. How do you feel? They say, I feel fine. But when scientists look at these people, they're quite impaired. So your own feeling that you've trained yourself or that it doesn't really affect you is not a very good guide.
Right.
You need to get that sleep.
So get sleep.
It's very basic. Okay. And by the same token, a little bit of exercise. Exercise, it's like this magic elixir. It calms you down and energizes you. So if you're feeling anxious and agitated, it will help you feel calmer. If you're feeling kind of sluggish and listless, it will pick you up. And so it's even being like 15 minutes outside in the sunshine. And that's where you get the biggest health benefits too. It's like that first 20-minute walk. You don't have to take a spin class. It's just that little bit of exercise. And I think like connecting to your body is always a good way. And so here's something that's more fun. I love the sense of smell. This is a quick hit of pleasure. A beautiful perfume, the smell of vanilla, the smell of grapefruit, fresh towels, a hardware store, dirt after rain, all these smells, they're right there. And if we don't pay attention to them, they kind of fade away. But if we focus on them, they're right there. And there's no calories, no cost, no time or energy. It's just quick hit. Yeah. It's so satisfying. But if I had to say what is the element, what's the secret to happiness? Like, what should people really focus on? Ancient philosophers and contemporary scientists agree. It's relationships. And when you look at the people who are the happiest, the people that have the most relationships, we need to feel like we belong. We need to feel like we're in long-term, intimate relationships. We need to be able to confide. We need to be able to get support. And just as important for happiness, we need to be able to give support. Yeah. So you need this relationship. So whenever you're thinking about how to spend your time, energy, or money, all of which are in short supply, anything that creates or deepens your relationships is something that's probably going to pay off. Yeah. Thinking about having people over for brunch, if you're thinking about joining a book group, if you're thinking about showing up to a reunion, if you think about, talking with that group of people who are walking their dogs in the morning, these little ways, even the smallest forms of engagement, talking to a sales clerk tends to lift people's mood, any kind of engagement. But then the more you do to keep those relationships strong and broad is something that is really going to strengthen your happiness. It's really relationship.
You've actually, it's really interesting. You've said some things that have just resonated so much with me, especially after talking to two people recently. One was a brain neuroscientist, Dr. Medina, about the brain, how to keep it healthy, exercise, sleep, social connections. Then I spoke to Suzanne Braun-Levine a few days ago, and I don't know if you know Suzanne. She was the first editor of Ms. Magazine, feminist, very strong women's advocate, and she's just written a book called "You Gotta Have Girlfriends," and the importance of a post-50 posse. And this and the interesting thing though, and I just raised this point with you, is that the community, it's interesting. I just did a post on Facebook and asked them if they had a choice, would they live in their, after retirement, would they live alone? Would they live in a mixed community of men, women, children, but a community, co-housing? Or would they want to live in a sort of old folks retirement village? And I would say 90% that answered said alone. Now, this is very interesting to me, just after what you said, because it may be that they've had bumps and divorces and, disappointments and so on that make them want to stay alone. But it's that very behavior that you've just described that is actually not going to help them be really happy, that they're going to be okay. So I don't wonder if you have any thoughts on that kind of trend.
And I've thought about that a lot myself, because I had a sort of a similar experience where I live in New York City, where everybody was and one afternoon I had this occasion to go to an apartment building that was like a huge apartment building, not so fancy. They were like doormen, like, "Hey, Mrs. Smith, you're dry cleaning," and kids running around and dogs off the leash, and it was sort of mayhem, but everybody was sort of mixed up together. And then I went to the fanciest building in New York City, and I had a package to deliver, and the doorman took it, and I could see the beautiful flowers and the giant vase, and it was very quiet and calm. And I thought, everybody thinks you'd be happier living in the fancy building, but I bet the experience of life in the chaotic, noisy, oh my God, dog is yapping, it's like sometimes we resist that bumping up against people because it takes energy from us, and and yet we draw energy and life from it. And this is what I think about when you're feeling blue, because a lot of times when you're feeling blue and somebody says, "Hey, come out with us," you're like, "I don't want to deal with it. I don't have the energy. I need," And there's true restorative leisure, which we all need. And some of us need enormous amounts of restorative leisure when we have solitude and we have quiet and we're with our own thoughts. That's very different from that retreat and that low energy feeling of I can't deal. And sometimes when you have that low feeling, that's the very time to force yourself out. And it picks you up because we get that energy from other people. So I think you're right. We have to be very wary of our own impulse to pull back.
Yes.
When we're forced forward, that we get that lift. It feels like it's going to be too much, but when we get there,
we're energized. So you have a blog.
Even introverts are energized by social engagement, but they need a different kind of social engagement.
Yeah. No, I'm just sorry to interrupt you. All I was going to say is you've got this blog called The Happiness Project, where I understand people around the world now are basically, I don't know exactly what they're doing. Are they getting together and meeting to talk about the project? And I mean, maybe, in fact, doing exactly what you've just described, creating some energy amongst community. Can you tell us a bit about the project and how that's playing out?
Yeah, so I did my happiness project, and I have to say, I never thought about other people, getting together in groups and doing it. And yet I kept hearing about it from people, from my readers. And so I created a starter kit. And this is for people who want to start a group for people doing happiness projects together. And this is such a great idea because really, I mean, you look at things like AA and Weight Watchers, people get a lot of energy and accountability, which is really important, and ideas and encouragement when they join together in groups. So these are groups, and sometimes it's people that know each other. Like I know there was a group of nurses who did it once a month on their lunch hour. There were some parole officers in London.
That's great.
Like students, college students, or even high school students. I have a lot of high school students, active leaders. And then sometimes it's strangers coming together, like people who say, "Hey, who wants to do this? Who lives in northern San Francisco or whatever." And they all kind of do with it what they want. I have a starter kit to give people ideas, but then I say, there's no right or wrong way. You figure out what works for your community, and they just sort of do their own thing. But I think it's great because there is this energy that comes from being in a group. Because the fact is, happiness project aside, just being in a new group is going to make people happier. So you've already got that going for you. Yeah. We all have had that like, I've made a new friend, that feeling of energy and a possibility that you get. It's so exciting to get a new friend. So, and then when you join a group, that you have something in common, like you have values, common interests, something to talk about. So it's not like just meeting a stranger on a corner where you're like, I don't even know where to start. It's like, oh, well, here we can talk about these things because we know we're both interested in it. So it's easier to
That's great.
start that social network.
I think that's why the 60andMe community has grown so fast. Now that I stop to think about it, it's that these women over 60 are not in the workplace anymore, many of them, and they're cut off a bit from friends, and their children maybe are living in other cities. And this at least gives them one point of connection with a woman who has a similar reality, which is they're 60. And that's a whole, world. But we'll put your website up, and people could, even in our community, could just come out and pick up a starter kit and get and join up in their local areas. That sounds really great.
Yeah. No,
it's fantastic.
It's been exciting to see that happen. Yeah.
So I know you're onto another project now, though, and you've kind of taken this happiness project and moved it into your home, and and you've got another year of adventure ahead of you. Tell us what you're up to.
Right. So the paperback of Happier at Home is coming out soon, and it's called Happier at Home. And what I realized after I'd spent all these years thinking and talking about happiness is really so many of the elements of a happy life come together in the idea of home. So it's time, possessions, body, neighbors, family, all these, your own inner attitude, all these things come together. And so I decided with Happier at Home, I would make it narrower but deeper into this idea of home. Because one of the things that's, there are very few universals in the world, but almost everybody has an idea of home. Now, you might have a ton of people in your home. You might live by yourself. You might have all different kinds of home, but most of us have this idea of like this physical place, but it's also a frame of mind. It's we want a lot from our home. We want it to calm us, but also to energize us, to give us solitude, but also be a place of engagement. So all these things come together. And I thought, you can't really be happy if you're not happy at home. And so I wanted to see what I could do to really change the experience of my home, which, as we were talking about earlier, meant a lot of changing of my own thinking. So this was really exciting because I could take the sort of, in the happiness project, I sort of figured out all the basic groundwork of happiness. And here I could really push it further into, this, like, one thing, I mean, back to your idea of like, what are the little things somebody could do if they, weird, counterintuitive. I'm not saying this is the most important thing you could do, but there's something about clutter that over and over people report that there's something about clearing clutter, getting rid of things you need, don't use, don't want, making that space that it makes people feel more energetic, more creative, more optimistic. There's something, it's like people feel like this weight is off their mind. And a friend of mine said, I cleaned out my refrigerator and now I feel like I can switch careers.
Can change the world. It's very therapeutic.
It's very therapeutic. And so like cleaning out a garage, clearing out an old guest room, clearing out a closet, getting rid of the coats you don't wear. There's, you give things away to people who can use them, and that feels good. You're getting rid of things that don't work. A lot of times we all have projects that make us feel a little guilty, like, oh, I was going to knit that sweater 5 years ago, or, oh, that scrapbook that I was going to make, a friend of mine was making a baby scrapbook for her 7-year-old. It's like, get over it. Like, give the wool to somebody who's actually going to knit something with it, and get it off your shelves and off of your conscience. So abandoning those things.
You've actually raised a really interesting point. I think you're ahead of the curve here, because I think there's actually a cultural shift going on. I mean, you're talking about the home in this book, but I think just generally speaking, with the collaborative consumption, the share economy that's going on out in the world, where people are realizing they don't need to own stuff, they can share it. And in really what you just said about downsizing and minimizing and focusing on what's important, is become the priority. So maybe the next book can be about the cultural cleanup that maybe we need to go through.
My next book actually is going to be about habits.
Oh, interesting.
How we make and break habits, which is obviously very tied to happiness. But to your point about downsizing and everything, one of the things that happens when you get rid of the things that you don't need, don't use, and don't love is that you can shine a spotlight on the things that you do love. Absolutely. And I think all of us want to walk into our home and feel it, that it's reflecting the people and the places and the experiences that are important to us. And when you get rid of the stuff you don't like, then you can shine a spotlight on your seashell collection or your family photographs or everything you have about France, or your tools, or which I call like making a shrine to something. Yes. And so then there's more room and more space for the things that you do love. And so you feel like your home is a better reflection of your values. And that makes you feel good because you're surrounded by things that you love, and all that other stuff is just gone.
I think you made a comment in your book. I don't know where I read it, but it was something about simplicity is very complicated.
Yes, that's right.
Which I think is really so true. It's about 3 years ago, I went through a downsizing exercise and tried to get down to 200 items. This was my mission, taking the 15 berets and getting down to 200. And I sort of accomplished it, but it was the process that was amazing. It was that, I even said, I think in my journal, that this is not as easy. It's complicated to be simple, to choose. Sure. Okay, 15 berets. What are the 3 that I really need? What are the colors?
Yeah.
And like you said, that reflect your values. So that's
very, and I think that's why it's helpful to have a friend. I love hearing other people's closets.
Yes.
So beg my friends to come over and help them, because it's so much easier when there's somebody there who's like, "Are you kidding? 15 berets? You're insane!" Like like this one's ugly and this one's got a hole in it. Sometimes having a friend there, it's kind of fun, and like they kind of can help you make those tough choices. Because also, I think, like, especially with mementos, like people, it's like, oh, but this one reminds me of that trip I took to Italy, and this was the one I had in college, and they're all precious. And so sometimes you have to say, like, well, I'm going to take a picture of it, or I'm going to, like, find, or like, I have so many mementos of that trip to Italy, I don't need this too. Or, I had a friend who had like 8 evening gowns that she was hanging on to. She never wore them, but she wore them to events when she was dating her boyfriend, who then very sadly died. And I was like, you have so many mementos of him. You don't need 8 ball gowns to remember him. Maybe 1 ball gown, but maybe not even 1 ball gown. Like maybe just like a really wonderful photograph of him on your desk. And then when she had never really thought about why she was hanging on to those ball gowns, but then when she really was thinking, these are not important for my memories, really, because I have other ways to remember him that take up a lot less room. So then able to let go of these things, because they had sort of been imbued with this importance that she hadn't really forced herself. But that process, like you say, it can be tiring and complicated to go through. Why is this important to me? Do I need to keep it? How is it playing a role in my life right now?
Yeah. And I think that comes full circle to where we started with happiness, because I think that is where happiness resides. It's when you can look at your world and know the things that are truly important, that energize you, that reflect your inner values. And it's been a really, really interesting chat. I've really, really enjoyed this. And I know people are going to get value, but let's just close with some tips.
Okay.
I know, for example, I remember you reading that you said one thing that people should definitely do is always greet each other and hug each other when they come in, show love. Yeah. What are some things in your home that you think people can do to make it a happier place?
Well, one thing I do is, gratitude is super important for happiness. So every time I walk in or out of my apartment building, I have to use a couple keys, and so there's a little delay. And I use that time to sort of think how happy I am to be home, my house and my family. And so just to have some kind of gratitude ritual is very nice. And like some people do it on their computer, like with their screensaver or their password, but just find a time in your life where it's easy to take for granted the things that are most important to have some sort of way to cue yourself.
Yes.
Another thing is to, weirdly, and I'm not saying this is the most important thing you can do, but over and over people tell me that it's useful. Make your bed. Unless you're somebody who loves not making your bed. Like, my mother forced me to make my bed every day, and now I don't. I love it. For most people, there's just something about that little act of order. Over and over, people tell me, like, I started making my bed and I feel great. I don't know why this has this weird importance, but it is something. Another thing that I've been thinking a lot about with my habits book is something that I call broken windows. And these are like the individual things that in your life signal disorder to you. And these are different for everyone. Like my husband doesn't like dirty dishes in the sink. For me, as long as the dirty dishes are in the sink, I'm okay. For him, they got to be in the dishwasher. So that's, we have a different window. Making your bed, dirty clothes out, unanswered mail, recycling that hasn't been dealt with, loose change, things out of place. Like I can't find my phone. I can't find my charger. I can't find my keys. Where are my sunglasses? Like everybody has like 4 or 5 things that kind of drive them crazy. And once you recognize that about yourself and you say, okay, I'm really going to stay on top of these things, because the more we feel in control of our lives, the feeling of control is very important to happiness. Now, and you might say like, well, it's an illusion, but it's a helpful illusion. And so maybe you can't control the fact that you just got laid off, but if you can control what you can control, it will give you a better sense of like, you'll feel more serene, you'll feel more in control. And when we feel more that way, then we are able to ask more of ourselves, to do things like, make ourselves go to sleep, get a little bit of exercise, not lose our temper, the more that we feel in control, the more self-command we have. So these are really good things to do, is to look for those little indicators. Not getting dressed, like I wear yoga pants every day and I love it. But for a lot of people, like wearing pajama-like clothing, really it's sort of a drag, drags them down, makes them feel they're not like really putting their best foot forward. It's important for them to like do their hair or put on a little mascara or wear real clothes as opposed to like fake pajamas, which is what I wear. And then there's things like make sure that you have time for fun, that there's something that you're actually looking forward to, not just something like that's fun for someone else or fun for the whole family or other people say is fun. It's like, is there something on your calendar that you're actually looking forward to? And you're like, oh, it's going to be great because a week from today, I'm going to be doing X, whether it's a book group or taking a painting class or going to the library and checking out a book. I've been on a reading binge lately, and every book that I've been reading is good. It's like every book I read is bad. Every book I read is good. And I was like, oh my God, it makes me so happy. I'm going to go get some more books. And, don't have to be things that take a lot of time, energy. You have to find those things and give yourself those little treats and those moments of anticipation. Because, when you feel happier, you're better able to make other people happier too. It's when we're feeling happy ourselves that we can really look outward and think about other people and the problems of the world. So sometimes people worry that it's selfish to worry about being happier, but it's really not, because happier people are more altruistic. They give away more money. They volunteer more. They have the wherewithal to look outward, and when we're kind of tend to turn inward and to be preoccupied with their own problems. So it's really, if it is selfish to want to be happy, we should be selfish, if only for selfless reasons. So it's not selfish to think about yourself and what you need in order to be happy.
That's fantastic. And I was actually, as you were talking, I was thinking that if I've learned one thing through this conversation is that happiness is really about self-reflection, about making time for yourself.
Self-knowledge.
And a lot of women our age have been giving all their lives. And like you said earlier, there's nothing wrong with wanting to receive and to give. Yeah. I mean, giving is great. But there's also importance in putting yourself first and, just reflecting on your life and being grateful for the things that you have, appreciate those, all the abundance around us. And so I hope people will read your book. It really is fantastic. It's really inspirational.
Oh,
and
thank you.
We'll point to that. And also, your new book is coming out, or is your new one on the Home out yet?
Yes, Happier at Home is out.
Okay, great. Well, we'll put that up as well. And are there any last minute words you'd like to say for the community?
I think you put your finger on the perfect kind of conclusion, which is in the end, it's about self-knowledge and then and having the life that reflects our own interests, our own values, our own temperament. That's how we can be happier and engaging with other people, which is why something like 60andMe can play such an important role because by allowing you to easily find your way to other people who have similar interests, well, then that just enriches your world, gives you that little bit of energy and that little bit of connection, that can lead to really, really great things.
Thank you for that. That's great. Well, I really appreciate your time. You are a true inspiration, Gretchen. Thanks again for everything, and keep writing wonderful books. We'll be behind you.
Well, thank you.
Thanks again.
Thanks.
Take care.